Welcome back to Autopsy of a Horror Movie. My name is Brucker, and today I am joined by two very awesome friends of mine. I am joined by Levi and Rachel. Hey guys, how y'all doing?
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming back on the show. People, you may remember them from my very fun Halloween episode where they came on to rank the 10 shorts in Tales of Halloween. That was a ball. I loved that. Was probably one of my favorite episodes I've done so far.
I know, that was so much fun. I can't. We just kept going. It just kept going and going, and I was honestly really sad when it stopped.
Yeah,
It was
right.
so fun.
So today the team assembles again to talk about one of my favorite classic horror movies. We're talking about The Invisible Man from 1933. And I am once again making my friends watch movies that they haven't seen before.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm really excited to talk about The Invisible Man. And I just want to thank everybody that follows me on Instagram because this was a vote that I did. I was really jonesing to cover a older movie, like a classic horror movie. And this was the one that won between the Instagram and Twitter polls votes combined. The Invisible Man won, which actually coincidentally ended up working out really well for... this will be coming out in June for Pride Month. So I was telling Levi and Rachel that there's a cool kind of Pride Month thing to go with The Invisible Man that I'll be getting into here in a second. But so guys, what did you all think of seeing The Invisible Man for the first time?
Oh man, where do I start? Yeah, I hadn't seen it before. And Brooker, you told me the thing that you led off with was talking about how the special effects hold up, even though it's a movie from the 1930s.
Right.
So I went in with pretty high expectations, and that was exactly what it was. Like, if you would have told me that this movie was made in like the mid to late 80s or early 90s, I would have believed you. Like, honestly, it held up so well. And I looked on, as I do, Rotten Tomatoes to see what people said about it, and a 94% tomato meter and an 85% audience score. And I think I would tend more towards closer to the 94 than I would the 85. I thought that this movie was so good, maybe even more than 94. I thought this was so good. I would say that this movie was... like, I know it's supposed to be a scary movie. I would say that this is more spooky than it is scary. Like, it's not. I didn't go to bed like, oh, but I was just like, ooh, there's some creepiness in there. But as a whole, I loved it. I was, again, the movies where it feels like it could go on forever and you kind of hope it keeps going are the movies that I really, really like. The ones where you finally get to the point where the credits roll, or that it's reaching the end, and you're kind of like, bummer. Like, this was one of those movies, so I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I really liked it. And I kind of approached it a little, honestly, like a little like an idiot. I was vaguely aware that like they've done a remake of Invisible Man, and I was like vaguely aware of the plot of that. Somewhere in the back of my brain, there's a book called Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, which is like not what this is about, but I always kind of thought that's what this was going to be about, and I was wrong. It's about an actual invisible person. And I like it. Like, we once, many moons ago, got to have a really great discussion over the old horror movie, The Thing, where we talked about how I love, like, old horror has to, like, actually make you feel scared because they can't do the same sort of, like, big jump scare monster come out of closet kind of thing. And this has a lot of just like creepy moments.
Yeah.
While it also does have really bombastic special effects, especially for 1933. But I thought it was super fun, super creepy, and like sometimes campy and sometimes funny. And sometimes I couldn't tell if it was intentionally funny or if it was funny because it's now like 2021. And so like obviously some of these things are silly.
There's definitely stuff to like look at it and go like, oh, isn't that a gas, like some of like the overacting that's in it kind of, or like the camp that's in it. I'm especially thinking of the female inn owner.
I was about to say her just screaming, just hollering.
Yeah,
I'd like to bring that back. I would like to be able to scream and faint whenever I just like am not feeling something anymore. I think that should be reclaimed in 2021. I could just like jump on tables and shriek.
Go and get the police.
I mean, it's just like the sign of the times. Like I think it fits. It puts it in the period in which it was made. The woman fainting and screaming, just screaming everywhere. It adds a texture to it that goes, oh, this is clearly like very, very beginning, of cinema.
Right.
Like honestly, at the rise of cinema for the first real moment. And that this is what cinema was, because it's. I mean, I guess this is more of a Rachel question, but I guess it's like as it goes from theater to, now it's on the big screen. Is this a leak from what was theater, and this is kind of like this is what you would do on the stage, and so this is. I mean, this woman who's playing this gal is, whatever
Una
in her
O'Connor.
60s, 70s, 80s. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? She was probably most likely born before cinema was even really kicking.
Yeah, when did we even go to audio movies?
So the first talkie was 1927, just 4 years before this movie. 4 years before this movie, and now they're
6 years before this. I guess they made it. And
I'm
then
sorry.
they released it.
I was thinking of Frankenstein, which was 31. But yeah, so 1927.
Nice.
So yeah, so 6 years before this. But
Golly.
yeah, so it's like, so just thinking of it, like, 27 is when we got like the first like synchronized audio talkie to we're getting like very, very prototype green screen technology in this movie. Right. And it's a big credit to the special effects supervisor that was on this. His name was John P. Fulton, and he was the one that figured out how to get all the special effects to work for this. It's instead of it being green screen, of course, it was like black felt. So same like premise. They would do the shot twice, one in front of like a black felt screen. And all like the body parts that they wanted to be invisible, they would just wrap in felt and then just kind of like superimpose the shots. Right. That's a very watered down explanation because I don't get it, but that's
right.
That's a whole different episode.
The water evaporates and becomes rain.
Right.
There's way more steps to that. Yeah.
Exactly. So I love what you were talking about, Levi, about kind of the transition between theater to cinema, because most of the people in here, including who we were just talking about, Una O'Connor, she was classically trained thespian, and lots of these people were working, on stages, in theatrical plays, and then they're still trying to transition into this. And you even kind of see it with like the camera work, because there is this unintentionally hilarious shot in this movie. I laugh every single time where we see Gloria Stewart's character, so the fiance of the Invisible Man, early on in the movie, when she gets mad at her dad and walks to another room, and the camera pans, but you see the false wall, and it's just like they didn't give a shit. Just like, all right, it's there. We don't know what to do. We can't cut around it yet. So it's just, I laugh so hard every time I see that, because it's just like, again, it's just kind of like, oh, like that's so cute that they thought they could just do that.
We're doing our best, okay?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm so glad that this movie was kind of conceived once the talkies started really rolling out, specifically because of Claude Rains,
yes,
and the guy who played the Invisible Man, because I think one of my favorite parts of the whole movie was his voice. Claude Rains' voice.
I give you a last chance to leave me alone. You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you.
Which, by the way, and I looked at it because I heard his voice, and it was just this, and we can talk more about it later too, but like it was just so jarring and rattling, but also smooth and very silky, and it pulls you in, and then it punches you in the gut and terrifies you. I was like, what else has he... And he has done everything, including... He was the Phantom for 1943's The Phantom of the Opera, and I said, that is the most true thing I've ever heard. I mean, like this... like silky voice, but he's mad on the inside, like in an intellectual and emotional way. He's just mad, and it's so it fits so perfectly. So yeah, Claude Rains was definitely got popular in the right time because his voice is captivating.
Yes, it is, and that's actually kind of why James Whale picked him for this, was for his voice. Since we've been throwing around actors' names, let me go ahead and go over some of the credentials for this before we continue our discussion.
For sure.
So The Invisible Man came out in 1933, and it was directed by James Whale, who also directed Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein, this movie, and The Old Dark House, all four which are still considered classic horror movies to this day. This was written by R.C. Sheriff, and this is obviously a adaptation of the novel by H.G. Wells, who did play kind of like a consultant role in making this, and him and James Whale worked together on kind of like the overall vision of this. So H.G. Wells did kind of like give his stamp of approval on this story. This movie stars Claude Rains as the Invisible Man, Gloria Stewart, William Harrington, Henry Traver, and Una O'Connor. Out of that list, I kind of want to point out Gloria Stewart. I don't know if you two saw on IMDb or anything, but so Gloria Stewart played Jack Griffin's fiance in this. She's also in a movie that I know you two have seen. She played present-day Rose in the Titanic.
No way.
Yes.
Wow, that is nuts.
I see it.
I mean, she was honestly
Wild.
kind of a stud star in this age, and she was involved in lots of stuff. She was even a founder of the Hollywood anti-Nazi group. I don't know what that did, but she was a founder in that. And Henry Traver, who played the older scientist in this, who played her father,
Yeah.
you probably recognized him from It's a Wonderful Life. He was Clarence.
Oh my gosh. I don't know why I didn't put that together. Have you seen It's a Wonderful Life?
Oh, like a million years ago.
He's the angel. Clarence. You know,
I do.
I don't know.
believe you.
I don't know
I
why
believe
me
you.
saying Clarence would be. I really feel like
Clarence.
Did that not jog
if my-
your memory?
If my brother were here, I'd be like, Clarence, but yeah, that's right.
yes, Clarence.
Yeah,
Clarence.
he gets his wings. Oh my gosh, that is so. Oh, I see it now. Now I can't unsee it. Thankfully, God, that is so. I can't believe I missed that. Gosh.
I mean, like, I didn't... my girlfriend was the one that pointed out the Clarence thing to me, but it wasn't until I did the research I found out about Gloria Stewart. I was like, no freaking way! Like, I've already seen her in a movie before this. But, so, I want to kind of circle back to the point I made at the beginning about how I think that this is actually kind of an appropriate movie to be covering during Pride Month. Because James Whale, the director of this, was an openly gay director during the 1930s.
During the
Crazy.
1930s?
Yes, he
Whoa.
was. If people tuned in from my Instagram live, you've kind of heard this spiel, but James Whale is a really cool, I think kind of like a horror icon and just filmmaker. A little bit of his background: he's British. He during World War I, he served in the British Army, but he was captured by the Germans and held as a prisoner of war during World War I. But that's where he discovered that he had a passion for drama. So after the war, he decided to pursue that and moved over to the States, where he got hired by Universal to make these monster movies, starting with Frankenstein from 1931. And I just think it's so impressive that, because we kind of talked about earlier about how the talkies, at the point where he made Frankenstein, the talkies only been around for like 4 years. So I think it's so impressive that, coming out the gate, transitioning from theater to trying to figure out what the hell movies are, and 4 of his movies are still considered classic horror movies, and 4 of them have been nominated to be put into the National Congress Library, and
Whoa.
one of them is on his movie Frankenstein. Is on AFI's top 100 list at number 56 still.
Dang.
So
Whoa.
I think it's kind of important to highlight that just how impressive that was at the time, and how, I mean, I didn't really know about him until like quarantine forced me to look into movies I haven't watched before, and I was like, who's this James Whale guy? I'm really liking his
that sounds
movies. So
brilliant.
yeah, James Whale, about what some of you were kind of saying earlier about his actors kind of seem really campy and everything. Apparently, from what I've read online, that's kind of like a kind of like code during this times, like to make your actors be a little campy, or I'm using the language that was written in the articles I read as sissy. That was kind of like homosexual coding at the time. So you kind of put in all like these queer coding in these movies for us to pick up later on, especially like in The Bride of Frankenstein. But I've had
Interesting.
buddy Dustin, friend of the show, give me kind of like his interpretation of this is that like the Invisible Man can also be kind of seen as like a queer coding as well, because it's like hiding who you are. And even just like, you know, in society and lots of this, we never see his like physical body with his fiance in this movie at all. And even when they do have an interaction, he is still technically invisible. So it's there's a reading there for that.
It's interesting. So it's like when he's invisible, that's him hiding his true self, or that they can't see his true self. Is that the idea behind it?
Yeah. That's kind of like that's like a read that you could have on that about how this, if you wanted to look at this with like a lens of like, okay, this is there like any sort of like queer coding in this movie that could be like a takeaway you get from this.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's interesting. That was probably, and maybe it's just because I don't understand, and maybe it's just because it was kind of a side quest. The love story, you know, and it kind of was. The love story between the two of them, I forget the character's name, but the Invisible Man and his fiance, that was, in my opinion, one of the weaker sides of this movie.
Yeah, there are no
honestly,
like real female characters in this.
Yeah, not really. Yeah, the love story was not really something that I think was super fleshed out, which I get, no pun intended, which I guess it was, which I guess was like supposed to be, that's what it was kind of supposed to be. It was like, this, like, oh, this is on the side, but like, oh, the Invisible Man. But honestly, that's one of the only weak points of the movie. Why, you know, what keeps it from being 100% in my mind as part of it, but it's still definitely safely in the 90s.
And interestingly, and I could be misreading this, I love seeing differences between books and movie adaptations, and I don't think she's a character in the book. Like, I think they invented her for the movie.
Huh.
You're talking about the barkeep or Flora, his fiance?
Flora, his fiance.
Oh, interesting.
No, the barkeep is
Oh,
universal.
the barkeep.
The
barkeep
barkeep is
is
a
there.
universal character.
Yeah.
So, like, make sure the
yeah.
barkeep is there.
The book is actually from the POV of the barkeep. No.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I don't think Flora is in it, and I think, if I'm also not mistaken, something that's really fascinating is that is Griffin the Invisible Man?
Yes, yeah, Jack Griffin.
Yes, perfect, thank you. I wanted to make sure I said that before I got it completely wrong. Griffin has albinism. He is a human who is albino.
Oh, interesting.
In the book?
Uh-huh.
Whoa. So he's trying to hide himself because he's an outcast? Because of his appearance?
I think the motivation was the same. I think that's just like...
Well, the motivation in the movie wasn't for him to hide. It was like a discovery.
Yeah, he wanted to discover this super cool science.
Right, but it was the motivation in the book to hide his albinoism?
It doesn't go... I mean, it could be. If you have read H.G. Wells' The Invisible Man, please write in.
Hello.
Hello, if you're out there listening live. It looks like the motivation was the same. He was trying to discover this like very cool new science. He tries to turn a cat invisible.
Oh, interesting.
And then tries to turn himself invisible.
Because
he intentionally was trying to make himself invisible.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, because that's something that they don't really explore, is like what type of experiments exactly that he was doing in this. But that kind of also brings me to a point that I love about this movie, is that I find it so interesting where this movie decides to start off. It's just, he's already invisible. He's entering this bar. He's the outcast person. And it's kind of like flipped because, and like horror is like a common sort of like trope, is to have like a creepy small town and like you, the outsider, come in and you're in danger. But in this, it's like a small town where like, you know, it's kind of safe, but then like this dangerous person comes into it.
Right.
I kind of love that, like, we, over the course of the movie, we get this slow backstory on like what happened just through like exposition. But it's, I don't know, I really like how this just starts off right off the bat with him being creepy, and it's just like, it just hooks you real quick.
Yeah. And I mean, it follows kind of the healthy rule of show don't tell. So we don't get like a, we don't get another Bruce Wayne watches his parents die again, and again, it's not like you're giving this very lengthy prologue to set up, okay, now the movie can start. It's we are throwing you smack dab in the middle of this narrative, and you're like, oh shoot, what is going on? Wait, they're engaged. He's going crazy. Like,
right,
so like you get to play. I mean, more. You like as the audience, we know a lot of what's going on, more than the people who are actually experiencing it. So it's not like you're playing detective necessarily, but you are slowly trying to figure things out, and they show it in such a way that it's really easy to follow. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's good.
What did he do first, this or Frankenstein?
Frankenstein was 31. Okay. This was 33.
Okay. That would make sense then, because Frankenstein has to have the creation story. And so if you don't want to then essentially do the same thing back to back of like, here's how the monster gets created, then the monster does things, the monster is a misunderstood genius, end plot, and then like repeat it all over again with this.
Right,
I think this was a super cool way of starting it.
And it's such
is the monster a genius in Frankenstein? I know he's intelligent.
Oh, true. I actually have not seen the super old version of Frankenstein. Because the monster's a genius in the book.
Is he a genius, Brooker?
In
the movie, no. So in the 31 movie, he does not. Spoilers, by the way. He
spoilers for a movie from 1931.
He doesn't get to the point to where he can like articulate, like vocally. Really, it's just like a lot of like grunts and things like that. But in its sequel, The Bride of Frankenstein, which Whale also did, which is better. I think it's so good.
Whoa.
He does learn to communicate, and that was also like a deeper movie, and it's a little bit closer to the Mary Shelley text, kind of. Mary Shelley's actually even a character in The Bride of Frankenstein.
Cool.
But yeah, so
stop the podcast, watching it immediately.
Yeah, no, I highly recommend it, but I'm going to pause the podcast for a second. So the Frankenstein movies are so frustrating though, because because you have to remember, like, this is like during like the 30s, so like we just like got done with like a war with Germany, so they wanted like no protagonists with like German names. So Victor Frankenstein is not Victor, it's Henry Frankenstein.
Stop.
But there is still another character in the movie called Victor Frankenstein, but it's not the Victor Frankenstein, and it's so confusing.
And is he like shown as like this really terrible
He's just
person?
like Henry's dad. Like, it's just...
They just like kept the name for funsies.
The oppressive father has
like,
a German
this
name.
Is not
yeah.
it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, anyways, okay. Frankenstein tangent done. What were we kind of talk about? I do love how this is like a self-contained story, and like we get like a mild origin story, but we'll talk about it when we get there. But yeah, this is just it felt like it kind of like a J.J. Abrams mystery box method of storytelling, and we're like, the Invisible Man was the mystery box, because we get like that hook, line, and sinker early on where we see like he is invisible when Una O'Connor character walks in on him when she goes to deliver the mustard, because mustard is like crucial to this meal apparently.
He will die without it.
And like it's like as soon as we see that he has like an invisible head or something, we're like, what? We cut back to his former colleagues and his fiance to see what he's up to, and we kind of get like a little bit of breadcrumbs, like, oh, he's gone missing, how did he get this way? So it's a lot of like mystery box stuff that we're following, and it's great. It's such like a clever and quick way to like grab your audience attention.
And and that was a part of the one of the strengths I thought of the film was the story as a whole, not just the big picture, but also how they went about wading through and progressing and bringing to life new characters and new pieces of the actual narrative. I thought that was definitely one of the stronger ones of the film.
I also love how I thought it was this is going to sound like stupid because it's probably like obvious that they would have done this, but I felt like it was just ingenious for him to have gloves, because I just want to like think about this for a second, because as an actor, I'm not an actor, but like, an actor, if I were one, I wouldn't speak as one right now. Your tool set to convey, the emotions that you're going through are like your voice and like your face, but they've cut away his face, and so it's kind of hard for him to like convey body language in this, but I thought it was so genius that in certain points in this movie, when he's like partially clothed, for like the important scenes, they still gave him gloves so he could be. And sorry if you hear my dog. You could be he could be expressionistic with that, with like finger pointing and things like that, because that's like very, I don't know, that's kind of like a very strong and like demonstrative like form of like body language, being able to like point and things like that. So I thought that was
Totally
very purposeful and genius to, in certain parts when he's partially clothed, sometimes he has gloves, sometimes he doesn't, just depending on the types of emotions he needed for the scene. So I thought that was really genius. So what types of subgenres of horror were y'all thinking that this movie was blending into?
I got a lot of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde vibes off of this.
Okay.
Like this kind of this fighting with, I mean, because in Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, for those of you who haven't read it, you have a scientist who is experimenting and creates this experiment, or this, this potion that essentially creates an alter ego within himself, and without spoiling the end, he is trying to suppress and push away this other entity that lives within himself, and will come out in the wee hours of the night and the morning. And so it's, I mean, this darker side of the Invisible Man, because he starts as this like brilliant scientist, and I think he's brilliant all the way through, but he goes from, I'm trying to create something new and advance and progress the sciences, to, I'm going to use this to not only steal what I want and do what I want, but take over the world. And even when he's talking to his fiance, the way that he kind of shows it is like, I'm doing this for you, but then whenever she's not there, he's like, I'm doing it for me, I'm going to run so it's kind of this like, he created this other version of himself through his own, desire to progress the sciences. So, again, all that to say, I kind of had this, a mix between drama, horror, a little bit of psychological thriller, a little bit of science fiction.
Right,
and
yeah.
I think this is just what I get from just old movies. I don't know if you guys know Gothic genre. That's specifically not. It sounds like it's a grittier thing than it is. But Gothic is more in reference to like the scenes, like if a beautiful house or whatever. But it kind of, again, I talk a lot about texture in film, but like the texture of the film felt very Gothic at times. It wasn't. I don't think it was supposed to be, but I got Gothic vibes off of it.
Huh,
at least.
interesting.
But yeah, just kind of a reflection of there was like at least in my mind, it's kind of in the same category as, but like a little bit different than Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
I like
Yeah, the monocaine is definitely making the which one's the evil one? Is it Mr. Hyde? That's the
Mr.
evil?
Hyde is
Mr.
the
Hyde.
you say evil. He is
the alter ego.
He is
the alter ego.
Well, yeah, he is the uninhibited one. I'll say that. He is not. It is a release of a piece
Of
that
societal restraints.
yeah, but it's something that lives inside everybody. And Dr. Jekyll in the book, again, we go a Frankenstein tangent and a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde tangent. But it's like he is a well-mannered, very like almost soft-spoken, very sweet man, and then this horrifying, like ravenous individual is birthed from his soul. So like, I mean, it's I think it's a again, it doesn't matter. It's a we can do a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde podcast, but it's a representation of something that I think is within all of us. But yeah. But anyway, Rachel, do you have anything?
I just think that's such a fascinating additional comparison to bring in, because I mean, obviously this is like horror / science fiction, because H.G. Wells is such like a huge science fiction person. But I also find it really fascinating that this director sort of like swayed towards two really like bodily science fiction stories that essentially come down to the question of like, what if we did this, but at what cost? Like, what if I love Frankenstein. I absolutely love Frankenstein, the book. I haven't.
And Mary Shelley.
But
The goddess that is.
but these like questions of like, can I create life? Can I completely alter life and like shape it in my image? And once I have done this, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, like I no longer have inhibitions. Like the thing I found most fascinating in Invisible Man is when he was talking about his speeches. Like I obviously watching it was like, okay, if I could be invisible, what would I do? Like being like, and if I like don't have morals, what would I do? And like robbing banks, totally. I'm on board with that. I'm like, okay, yeah, you take money. But he went straight to, I want to do random acts of violence.
Yeah.
Like I want to hurt people for the sake of hurting people. And I was like, damn.
Well, it's hurting people
That's-
for this.
Like
Hurting
for
people.
fear and power.
Yeah, hurting people in the name of showing your superiority and your ability to oppress.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I was like, wow, that is a leap from what I would think of
Which
doing.
it's really
humans have been
interesting.
doing for all of written history. Would we not also do that if we did not have the mental capacity to say this is wrong and I shouldn't do it?
But is that, and maybe, I mean, this is 3 people on one podcast. And so I wish I could get like 40 people on this podcast so we could get some more.
I mean, there's at least
Data
2. Well,
optics.
there's a Dr. Jekyll or a Mr. Hyde somewhere inside of me, so there's probably a Mrs. Like, there's probably, I could probably pull 40 people out of me.
But I found that fascinating that he, like, and this is what I really want to talk about. Like, he does this, he, like, has this power, and he's like, I will immediately use it to subjugate and cause fear and oppression. And that, like, in all of my worst, if I was like, I have no inhibitions, sure, I would totally rob a bank, but I would never go that far. And I so wonder if that's like a gendered split. Like in Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein, that her intention in writing Frankenstein was like, if man could create life the way women can, man would create life to destroy. And so, like, is that a difference? Like, women, if you're out there and you became invisible, would you have the intention of immediately subjugating and oppressing?
I love how you said women if you're out there.
Women, if you're out there,
That's
if one
a-
woman is out there.
That's a really interesting point you bring up, Rachel, because I haven't seen it yet, but this spawned kind of like its own franchise. Actually, all of these Universal classic monster movies have like 6 or 7 sequels to all of them. There were 6 Invisible Man movies.
Whoa.
But one of them is an Invisible Woman. I haven't seen it, but from what I've heard, it's more of like a slapstick comedy than it is something like this. So I think that kind of like sort of proves your point a little bit there, because you know kind of like the dichotomy of when if it was a woman that became invisible in this, what would be her motivations. And that was something that I wasn't like. That was another reason why I was kind of like comping The Dark Knight to this movie so much, and especially like Jack Griffin to the Joker, because he kind of just wants chaos for chaos. He says he wants to rule the world, but he says we'll rule by like making people bow down to us by like causing fear. But there's no real plan. There's no real like goal of like what he's trying to obtain, because like he does rob a bank at some point, but he doesn't keep any of the money. He just gives it all away, which made me think of how Heath Ledger's Joker just burnt his half of the money in that movie. And so I don't know, like he just seems to just want to cause fear, and is kind of getting into how like power corrupts too, because it's just like being invisible. I don't really get how that like gives you power, because like you're not like super strong or anything like that. Like I don't know, I feel like, and the police come up with good ideas of how to capture him in this, and so he's just able to evade it loosely a little bit, but like I don't know, like I don't know, it's kind of like, oh, I'm invisible now, I could rule the world. It's like I don't see that direct connection exactly, so it's kind of like this false, or not really false, it's hubris that he has, but I don't know. It's so I guess to circle back to the original question, what was this subgenre I was getting out of this? It was obviously sci-fi horror. I was also kind of getting like slasher-ish kind of too, because he is kind of like the Jason Voorhees in this. He is literally manhandling people to kill them, and also causes a train derailment to kill 100 people. And
Which, like, such a violent scene out of freaking nowhere.
yeah, right. I mean, he did like, there was like some foreshadowing of that, because he did say maybe I would derail a train or something like that.
Yeah.
But also, this is also a monster movie, even though it's such like a, I don't know, it's such like an interesting like case study for a monster, because when I think of monster movies, because I mean it is a Universal classic monster movie, I think of like Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, creature from the Black Lagoon, but like he's literally just an invisible man. Like that's, there's no like, and he has gills or anything like that. He's literally just invisible. So it's kind of interesting to think like, yeah, this is technically a monster movie, but really he's just a man.
Yeah, which is
Aren't
also
they all?
which is just so. I mean, actually, I'll save that thought. This is more of a conversation about the fear in the actual movie, but yeah, I'll save that for later.
Yeah, but yeah, that's pretty much what I got. Sci-fi horror slasher kind of, and of course, it's a monster movie. According to Dr. Carl Albrecht, there are 5 types of fear that all humans share, including extinction or the fear of death, mutilation, body invasion, loss of autonomy, separation, and the fear of humiliation, shame, or worthlessness, i.e. the death of ego. So I kind of like to use this as just like ground floor, just to get the juices going. But what types of fear do y'all think that this movie is playing off of?
Well, so I did not pick specific pieces from that list, but I did have some.
Same. This is like the first movie where I went, you know what? I'm not really feeling any of these fears too much in it.
Well, there were a couple, but it was like, I think it was a lot of like, yeah, I could squeeze that into that category.
Yeah, it's like technically.
Yeah. I had a few. So loss of control is one of them. So he slowly loses his mind as he goes from kind of this inspiration of discovery to a desire to, oppress and abuse just the world. If whatever his motivations were, if he had any, whether it was a madman or a want chaos, or he wanted to, whatever it was, just the idea that you would, in some capacity, lose control, because that was not his original intention. And even as he died, he was like, I can't believe I did that. So yeah, loss of control. I also had separation. This wasn't something that he was necessarily afraid of, but it was kind of the idea across my mind of, what if it is you turn invisible and you don't get to, like, the only way you can be present in the world, as in present by the eyes of everybody else, is you have to wrap yourself up. If you don't have that, then there is this removal. Like, you can willingly...
Oh, that's a good point.
There's a willing separation from the entire world, and kind of the anxiety of standing there and saying, can anybody see me? And I guess that's kind of the extreme side of that, is no one can see you, no one can hear you, no one can touch you. But that's like the first step, is you're invisible, and then you're mute, and then you can't be touched anymore. Like, it's just the progression of complete separation from reality.
That's such a good insight into that. That's something I never thought of for this.
Yeah. I don't know if it was like, he didn't necessarily experience it, but watching it, be like, oh my gosh, what if? This was the really big one for me. I called it the conscious monster, is what I call it. So it's like in a lot of situations, or at least like as a kid, when you are going to sleep, and this is different from between the people, but you're afraid there's like some gurgly monster, some werewolf or whatever under your bed, and it's going to jump out and grab you, or whatever. But if you can like get under the covers, they won't get you. Or if you can race to the bed, they won't, or whatever. Like, this is a situation where you could be in bed and the person could be sitting in the chair in the corner and you would not know about it. And it's not that it's just an invisible person, but it is a person who has cognition, like has a scientific mind, who can reason, who can come to rational conclusions, who can say, this is how you turn a doorknob. This is how I could sneak past you in the night. This is how I could unlock essentially a robber, but there's a monster proponent to it. So there's no real weakness. It's not like, oh, well, it's an animal, or, well, if as long as you, like, it's a human being, but with the kind of this monster entity to it. It's, he's invisible, he's going insane, but he's still a scientist who has, the ability to make decisions.
So So do you think that this is kind of like then like sort of playing because you're kind of emphasizing the point that he's a scientist? Is this kind of making a point that we should be fearful of like the boundaries that science is pushing for?
I mean, not necessarily for this fear in particular.
Okay.
That might be part of what the movie is trying to convey, but it's more of the. I mean, he's just like Rachel said. He's just a man who is invisible, and it took hundreds, if not thousands, of people to take this one like he's not overtly athletic. He's not like bloodthirsty. He doesn't have like this superpower. You just can't see him. And yet he robs banks and derails trains and murders people, like circumvents entire police forces. Like that is absolutely terrifying. He's not a criminal mastermind. He's just a guy.
Right.
And yet he can, all of this stuff can happen. So it's kind of the there's probably a better word than conscious, but like and intelligent doesn't feel like the right word, but a monster who can have deduction and come to reasonable conclusions, not you throw a rock and they go, oh, and they wander off to another part of the woods just trying to find their victim. It is I am making a conscious decision to walk into this house. Why? Because there's a person in there and I'm going to kill them. And it's like, oh my gosh, like that is terrifying.
So like the scary thing about him is that he has like problem solving skills.
Yes, he's an intelligent human being, and like it's the what makes a monster so scary. But take out all of the weaknesses of like they're stupid, they're an animal, they're slow, they have no real ambition, they're just like a robot, or they just are driven by animalistic tendencies. But it's like the worst part of a monster, and by most accounts the biggest strength of a human being, the intelligence and the problem solving. Those are the fears that I thought of.
I like that a lot.
We both had separation, and so I picked separation and rejection for like he's now made this decision and will never, like, as long as he remains like this, will never be reaccepted by society. Like he will always have that sort of layer between him and everyone else. And I also put loss of autonomy. I thought that was a really fascinating thing to be listed as one of the fears, because he sort of gained like new and unheard of autonomy while losing everyone, like every other idea of autonomy. Like now he can do whatever, he can go wherever, he can rob banks, he can get on trains, he can crash these trains, he can do all these things, but he's now lost the like average regular person autonomy of like going to the inn with your friend and having a meal. Like he will never get that back as long as he's in this state. And so like in the pursuit of this level of freedom and autonomy, he's lost everything else. Which I do, to your earlier point, like, is this a question of like the limits of science? I think pretty much all science fiction is asking that, not in a judgmental way. Is kind of the point. And so like, it's so interesting. I wish I had a better understanding of like science and culture when they would have been making this in the 1920s. Like I know that would have been a rise of a lot of like Darwinism and like all the different kind of thought of like we're like fighting world wars and we're having all this power and like what is that, like the power at what cost. But so those are two of my main ones. I'm pondering through all of this. Third one, which again might be something completely different, and just a completely different perspective. This is not a fear for him, the Invisible Man, but there is something just like really awful about the idea that like him, in order to like be his like invisible self, is fully naked, and just this like fully naked person is wandering around and you can't really do anything about it. Even the parts where like he has his friend, the like other scientist guy, and he's like sitting across from him, which I guess is supposed to be kind of funny. He's like smoking a cigar, like sitting in that chair across from him. Oh, like so creepy, like so awful to have to like think through that logistically. Like if you were sitting across from a person and being like, I can't see this person. Like, and so that, I think the threat of bodily invasion was a big part of the fear in the movie, even if that wasn't supposed to be necessarily coded or necessarily like written into it.
That's also kind of like an interesting metaphor too, that like at his core as a person, by like core I mean like, you know, naked, you can't see it, you don't know what he is, so it's kind of like you really don't know what's going on like behind the eyes of anyone, you know. It's kind of like you can't see past whatever is being presented in front of you, sort of. So it's kind of like that fear of like, but what are they really thinking, you know? So yeah, that's kind of like, as you were talking about this, that's kind of like where I was like, ooh, that's a connection I haven't thought of before for this.
I like your things. I also like that in a movie full of so much death, none of us picked death. Like none of us were like, the fear in this movie is death, because I didn't really think that.
Yeah, because like it's his experiments with monocaine that kind of led him to this condition, and it's also what's driving him psychologically to be violent and mad. But it wasn't like, there was also a caveat with that, like, oh, and like it's also poisonous, he's gonna die in 24 hours, you don't give him an antidote for the monocaine, which by the way is not a real thing that gets rid of pigments. It's like a local anesthetic, but it's just kind of interesting because as I was going through this, as I said earlier, I wasn't really picking up on many of these. Like, I was like, the fear of death, like, okay, like the character of Kemp, his colleague that he threatens to kill, is the only one that's really sort of experiencing this. But like I brought it up as a question as whether or not this movie is like an allegory for we should be fearful of like the boundaries of science or whatever. And I think like you said, Rachel, all sci-fi horror movies kind of do present that. But I wasn't really getting that, like, I don't think that's like what the take home of this movie is just kind of more of a vehicle for entertainment, sort of, in this. I wasn't really getting so much like this, like the science of this is what we should be fearful of. It's just, we should be fearful of people that obtain power, like a lot of power very quickly. And because like he didn't really go through I mean, yeah, sure, he worked on these experiments, but he didn't exactly go through the trials and tribulation and all of the failures and lessons that you should learn to where like you get to the point of power, so that way you're responsible with it. He kind of just got it pretty quickly, and so it's kind of like that fear of you should be scared of anybody that gets power overnight, because they don't know how to be responsible with it.
Suddenly I realized the power I held, the power to rule, to make the world grovel at my feet.
And that's like kind of what I was getting from this, is that they get a lot of hubris from that as well.
I love that. I also think that makes a lot of sense as to why, like you said, like if I turned invisible, I would not immediately be like, and now I can take over the world. Like, it would not be that straight jump. But
it's also part of like the monocaine. They write that in, that's making him go crazy, but still that was like the direction he took his craziness, you know. I know like we kind of talked about this really isn't like too much of a scary movie, but was there any sort of scene or just kind of like anything that like jumped out as like, you know, what you would call the scariest moment of this movie?
Yeah, for me, his voice was the scariest part of this movie for me.
I love that.
But it was my favorite part, and it was also the scariest part, because he would jump from this calm, like he was talking to his friend, and he was like, to have a seat, like, you know, could you just sit down, like we're gonna be partners in this now, and it's very calm. And then next step he's just like howling, like, oh, this is gonna happen, I'm gonna do all this and whatever. But it's like so deliberate, and it's so convincing, and it's not like you can look at somebody in the eye and be like, oh, he's conveying anger, he's conveying fear, he's conveying something. It's just cool, calm, collective, disarming, and then penetratingly loud. And it's almost on a dime at some points. And then even like he's so like, oh, you called someone, you called the police, I knew you'd call the police. And then he's alone with this girl, and then he is this completely other person, like, I'm doing this for us, I'm doing this for us. And then they leave, and he's running around throwing police officers everywhere, and he's cackling, and it's yeah. So really just the ebb and flow of his voice is the spookiest part for me.
Especially like as you said, like when he's trying to like con people, like when he tries to like tell Kemp that they should be partners, like we should be partners, like and everything.
Yeah.
It's just it's great.
We'll begin with a reign of terror. A few murders here and there. Murders of great men, murders of little men, just to show we make no distinction. We might even wreck a train or two.
Yeah, it's
and it's
great.
so it's him being like, this is a good thing, but you can see just and it's everybody around him that kind of cues you into like, oh, this is terrifying. Like he's not sitting there being like, okay, this is a good idea. He's sitting there being like, oh my gosh, I can't see him. Oh my gosh, he's talking to me. Oh my gosh, is this a good idea? Oh my gosh, I can't see his eyes. I can't read what he's trying to say. I can't see if I can trust him. So yeah, it's
amazing like how much you kind of like realize with the characters, like how much like body language plays into how you perceive someone talking to you.
For sure. For sure.
I had the scariest point to me was when he goes over to Kemp's house for the first time. Like Kemp is like in his study listening to the radio, has like a small fire going, and you kind of hear over the radio that, you know, this town has gone crazy. They think that there is an invisible man, which I also think is like a very funny trope that we're seeing so early in horror movies, that like that trope of somebody not believing somebody else when something bad is going on. It's like, this whole town is crazy. There's no way there's an invisible man. But anyways,
totally.
When him going there and like moving all the furniture, putting a log on the fire, we don't see it, and he's like, and we see Kemp is just dumbfounded at what's happening, like his jaw's on the floor, and we see how fearful he is, which is like, you know, a big praise to like the performance from him. And it gets so scary when he's just like, sit down. He like yells at him. You see he like swings up a like fire poker, and then we just see like his little butt cheeks sit down on the on the chair. But and him just like telling him all this stuff. And eventually he gets clothes on, and I love that we get like the backstory and like his evil plan by like the camera just looking at him, and it's not like this overlaying of montage of like stuff that happened to him beforehand or whatever what he wants to do. It's like, hey, he is an invisible person. Of course he's going to command your attention. We're just going to have you just watch him sit in a chair and just listen. And I don't know, like I could see if I were Kemp, this would be freaking terrifying.
Yeah. The ebb and flow of that scene was definitely one of the spookier ones. I agree for sure.
Yeah, no, mine was the stuff with Kemp, like just the building of almost that feeling of being trapped, like once he gets into the house.
Even in your own house, yeah.
Yeah, like there's nothing that he can really do about it. And even the slow build of like, I'm going to come back and I'm going to kill you in this certain amount of time.
Yeah, he comes back and says, I'll kill you at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, and that idea, like that is a horror that I thought was done really well in Stephen King's It. Like the idea that you could never really get away from Pennywise no matter where you went. Like there wasn't like a safe zone. There wasn't a... like you couldn't get under your bed, or you couldn't, like exactly what Levi was saying. And he managed with no supernatural ability to like have that quality, which I think is the best use of like horror when it comes to being invisible. Is he got in the car and he waited, what was it, like 2 hours or something?
Yeah.
The sort of
Kemp's death was probably my favorite out of this. Not because I wanted the character to die, because that was definitely like, I don't know, to me the scariest. It's probably like a toss up between this and the train derailment, but Kemp's was pretty scary.
Yeah, Kemp's death I thought for sure was the scariest, and just the weird, creepy, long lead up to it. But I think you guys made such a good point on him, like less even his invisibility was the scariest thing, but so many other aspects of him. Like I think it could essentially be summarized in like his volatility. Like even if he was not invisible, just the fear of something as simple as like he comes in, he like gets this room at the inn, and then the lady comes up with the mustard and he loses his mind. Like that is scary regardless of his invisibility. Just like you don't know what he's going to do next. You don't know the like level of violence he's going to bring to the situation. And it's doubled by the fact that you like can't read his body language and you don't really know how to gauge it or how to dodge it. But he was so much scarier than just like the actual like monster ability that he had.
Yeah. Again, because it's just really playing more into like the man part of the invisible man that was scary. I kind of said my piece about the message of the movie, about just how I feel like that this is just a story about how power corrupts and how hubris is also the downfall of people in those positions.
Yeah, I honestly I like yours better, Brooker, because of that. I think the rise to power quickly aspect I think is really good. I put down progress for the sake of progression can often result in regression. Boom, put that on a t-shirt.
Boom.
But it was just like the thought of I think there's a big difference between and it kind of touches on your it isn't the fear of science progressing too far, but it is, are we progressing science because we're trying to heal uncurable disease, cure cancer, help with, chronic diseases, or are we doing this so that we can have, who was the guy that, the guy with the EpiPen who's selling or insulin or whatever it was for like, $500 a pop because he's the only one that has it. Like, are you creating things and doing things that would end up helping people or would end up like advancing technology or advancing science or advancing our perspective in some way or another, but the end goal is this is for me. And I'm not talking specifically about like pursuing emotional health is for you, but that's a good thing. Like, you might be trying to help with racial reconciliation, and you yourself may be a person of color. That is a good thing. Like, that's not selfishness. Like, that is, and it's not selfish to seek emotional and mental health. That is a good thing that is beneficial for your entire life. I'm saying things like, like I said, like you are, I'm curing cancer and I'm going to sell it to all of these hospitals and all of these people who are willing to pay me a crap ton of money.
Yeah, it's definitely like the intention behind it. And that's like a really good point that you bring up because, as I mentioned earlier, we don't really know like why he was doing these experiments. So maybe it's possible monocaine didn't like drive him crazy. Like he was like already kind of there before doing these experiments, and that's like maybe like this all just kind of makes sense to like what he was wanting to do in the first place. So yeah, that's a good point.
My interpretation was that a life in isolation has no purpose. Like he.
Oh shit. I feel attacked. I'm just kidding.
You're like,
you are not in isolation. You have
you have a dog and a human. And
I know.
Friends, you have us.
You have us, right?
And you us. And not to say like, obviously not like, there's a lot of people in isolation right now. He chooses isolation. Like he, through the course of these thousands of experiments, knows that the outcome, like what the outcome will be. And though it is referenced that he thinks at some point he could perhaps figure out how to reverse it, like he knows that he will be cut off from society once he does this. And he, in doing that, gets this absolute power. He can now apparently rob banks, crush trains, etc. But he's lost all human connection. Like he loses his fiance, his friends, his all the like people around him that grounded him and made him a person.
Yeah.
And so, again, all good sci-fi says, at what cost? And like, at what cost to him gaining ultimate autonomy was losing all like human autonomy.
That's good.
Put that on a t-shirt. Thank you.
Put that on a t-shirt. That's
I don't know what the
good.
t-shirt thing is.
I just love it. I just love these, like, the idea of these increasingly text-heavy t-shirts. Like, they're not cute. It's just huge blocks of text.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, boy. All right. So, time for a fun segment. A Cabin in the Woods trinket. What movie prop from this would you put in the basement of the Cabin in the Woods from the titular movie? And once picked up or played with or whatever, it would summon the Invisible Man. I feel like that there are a bunch of candidates for this.
Yes. So I immediately thought, like, again, ran with the first thing that came to my mind, but the way that you find it is obviously a big part of it. So, like in Cabin in the Woods, you, like, the music box is, like, there, and I can't remember if they wind it up and then it plays, or if they walk up, it starts playing. I can't remember.
They definitely wind it up, yeah.
They wind it up, okay. So it's his goggles, like his 1930s glasses goggles. Like that's obviously, I feel like that's the easy answer because that's like his most prominent feature. That's the thing people remember from The Invisible Man. But it is not just that on a table. It's in a box. It's in some kind of box. I haven't really thought about what the visual is. I just pictured like a a pine box, just a normal square. And when you slide it open, it's resting in like hay. It's resting in hay.
Beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So the symbolism of obviously, his demise, his resting in the hay.
Which also love that he died because he just needed a nap. Like
right? I know it takes a lot of energy to derail a train.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
They're like, fuck your farm, dude. We need to get this guy. He's like, okay.
And if it snows, and that's just the whole can of beans that is just mounted against him. But the idea that I thought of it was, it just looks like a box, and I don't know, it's not sitting prominently on a table like the music box, the music box or whatever it was. It's stashed away, like it is seemingly invisible until you find it. So once you find it, then you know where it is, and if you have the wherewithal to actually open it up, then you see, and then you put them on. And I don't know if that means that the Invisible Man is summoned, or you become the Invisible Man if you put the glasses on. And maybe that's the caveat of, if you pick them up and and that's what ends up being, then the Invisible Man shows up. But if you actually go the step further and you put the glasses on, then you fade away and you start to lose your inhibitions and you become the monster.
There we go.
Kill everybody.
So that's my cabin in the woods.
That's a juicy twist.
Trinket.
I love that Levi turned a fill-in-the-blank question into an essay question. Yeah, that was great. I loved it. Love it.
No, it's never. Yeah, it says goggles/glasses, and then there's a line drawn, arrow pointing to the back of the page, and you flip it over, and it's the.
You drew a full comic.
And there's like one of those blue books stapled to it. Yeah,
yes, exactly.
The full 14 pages.
That's right.
For your bonus content, you can use the clip of when he said goggles. I threw my body down because I was positive you were gonna say gloves. Because I picked goggles, and I was positive you were gonna say gloves.
You thought I was gonna say gloves?
Yes.
What made you think it was gonna say gloves?
Because he's so, all the stuff, he's so emotive with his gloves and the pointing and the feet. And
that was Brooker's point.
Oh, that was Brooker's point. Dang. Okay. Okay. Well, I hope you picked gloves.
Here, I'll let you think. Here, we'll tap out for a second.
Yeah.
No, I have mine.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm still doing goggles because I 100% thought goggles. I just thought we were gonna pick two different ones. Yes, I think it's the goggles. I think when you see the goggles, obviously some poor tween puts the goggles on and sees him invisible. So it's a naked man just standing in the basement.
Oh my god!
And he's
kind of like
there.
a 13's ghost, 13 ghost situation.
And he's just and they're like, oh, what crap! And so obviously, as you'd freak out, and so they freak out and they pull the goggles off, he puts the goggles on.
That's really good.
And so I just I could see it immediately, the hard cut of the character picking up the goggles and being like, look at these weird things, and camera turn, and it's just.
That's really good.
Just standing
I'm
there.
gonna vote that we just combine ours into one answer, where it can be the box, but
in the hay.
In the hay, but yours is better where when they put it on they see him. And then that's really good. And then he puts them on.
And then he yells at you, give those bick, because everybody...
Give those bick to me.
Yeah, what's all this? Keep back there. Keep back, me.
Guys,
he keeps calling you his fiance's name, and you're like, who is it?
Flora, yeah. Which, by the way, I forgot to mention this. Kemp has a picture of Flora on his mantle in the study. I don't know if y'all saw that.
Ew.
I would not like this guy either if I were Jack Griffin. Anyways,
weirdly though, Jack Griffin's not going after him because at least I don't remember him saying anything about you're going after my fiance, you son of a gun, I will kill you. But it's like he just I think it just allows us to hate him, so you're not like, no, the Invisible Man killed this kind human being.
I don't know. It was just there's literally no other women that we could get a picture of, so just...
Yeah, really.
Gloria?
There just are no other women.
I mean, I think I would have been very upset
everybody
if he
knows that there was another
Clarence.
woman until Elizabeth Moss to make the remake, so yeah, there was just... Between 1933 and 2019
there were no other
yeah,
women.
there were no other women.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so Rachel, you're lucky to be alive. I'm just kidding.
Yes, thank you. I feel really grateful.
Mine was the fucking swanky ass robe that he steals from Kemp.
Oh.
Dude, that getup he wears when that Kemp gives him, I was like, I want to dress like that now. Like, that looks amazing. Yeah, just fancy monster wardrobe. Give it to me.
Fancy monster wardrobe.
So is it like it's in the basement hung up like with all like
Yeah, it's just like on a
bunch of,
coat rack.
plaid.
It's just on
It's
a
like a
coat
bunch
rack.
of plaid shirts or like all like navy pea coats, like old timey like trench coats, and then one glamorous robe.
Yeah, and you just go, ooh, that looks like something I want to get snuggled up in this cabin in the woods. Yes, please.
And
like,
you know
that's...
the jock who is actually the fool is the one that puts on the robe. Like, he's the one that is.
Well, he's just like, oh, it's a boxing robe. Like, that's where like he goes with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and he says, and this would be only if it's like if it's only in like 20 or 2021. Like he's like shadow boxing, and you're imagining him being like, look, I'm Holyfield, or look, I'm Tyson, or look, I'm Ali, but he's like, look, I'm Logan Paul,
No.
and he's like punching the air, and you're like, oh,
Kill
this guy
me.
sucks.
Yeah. You're like, oh god, kill him. This guy right here. Ugh.
Yeah, he gonna die real quick.
Put it big. Yeah.
it big.
Well, do y'all have so? All right.
Rewind it big. I like this turning.
We must go big to the future. Yeah.
We must go big.
I also love the constable in this. He's like, he's invisible. That's what's the matter with him. It's kind of just like, oh, that explains it. Cool.
Oh, it's all so clear now.
Yeah. Anyways. Before we start to wrap things up, do y'all have any closing thoughts to The Invisible Man from 1933?
Super good. If you haven't seen it, go see it. If you haven't seen it and you listened all the way to the end, like, bummer. But like, you should still go watch it. It's still
so
a great
good.
experience. It's really fun, and there's there's something weirdly comforting about watching something made in like the 30s and 40s.
Yes,
like,
I agree.
If you can find something that doesn't have any like outdated outdated moral themes, like this movie that doesn't, there's not like, ooh, that's not super great, that doesn't translate well into 2020.
They don't exactly talk to Flora real well in this, but yeah, that's
right.
But
given
you acknowledge and you go, okay, that's not cool.
Yeah. Given everything else that was happening in the 30s, I was actually pretty impressed with how relatively smooth the process went for the movie. But yes, you should absolutely watch this movie. 94% on Rotten Tomatoes is a very, very fair grade. It's definitely worth a watch. And now I've got to go watch Frankenstein. I haven't seen that yet, and I need to make that happen.
Yes.
Yeah, I really want to see his Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. Maybe something, my still favorite of all time, like old horror movie is still the thing, and so if anything can ever top that, then full kudos and credits.
Yeah. Yeah, it's...
Did this top the thing?
Oh, no. But maybe a spooky old dark house. This was great. This was seriously great. But
Thank you so much, Rachel and Levi, for coming on to talk about The Invisible Man from 1933. Everybody be sure to check it out. Be sure to check out my Buy Me a Coffee page, where I'm going to have a commentary track for this movie on there at the Skeleton Crew level. Oh my goodness. Okay, share me with a friend. Visit my Buy Me a Coffee page. Follow me on Instagram at Brecker Horror. I will see you guys next time. Watch some good movies. Goodbye.
Bye.
goodbye.
And one last shout out to Shelly for being part of the Skeleton Crew on my Buy Me a Coffee page. Thank you so much for your support, Shelly. If you want to be like her, you could join my Buy Me a Coffee page at buymeacoffee.com/BreckerHorror.